When we look back at Britain's history, the meals of the working class were never just about filling stomachs. They were quiet but powerful witnesses to economic struggles, war years, scarcity, and at the same time, resilience and togetherness. In days of long shifts, low wages, and coal-smoked towns, it was often the food on the table that brought warmth and comfort. These dishes carried the strength of mothers keeping families fed, of factory workers sharing breaks, of children growing up with flavors that shaped their memories. And the most striking part? Most of them were born from almost nothing. When resources were scarce, creativity and necessity combined to produce meals that were hearty, filling, and passed down through generations in this story. We'll revisit 12 unforgettable dishes of Britain's working-class kitchen. We'll uncover the circumstances that created them, the eras they thrived in, how they were prepared, and why today they remain nostalgic treasures. Our first stop is one with a name that still brings a smile: Bubble and Squeak. 1. Bubble and Squeak is one of the most resourceful dishes in British cooking. Even its name carries a kind of playful humor and humility. Its origins lie entirely in frugality. From the late 18th century onward, working-class homes made sure no Sunday roast leftovers went to waste. Potatoes, cabbage, carrots, or any other vegetables from the big Sunday meal were fried up on Monday, reborn as Bubble and Squeak. The name comes from the sound it makes in the pan, bubbling and squeaking as the vegetables crisp. For working families, this wasn't only about saving money, it was tradition. Monday dinners symbolized a bridge between the weekend feast and the new week's routine. The preparation was simple. Boiled potatoes and cabbage were mashed together, then fried in a pan until golden on the outside and soft inside. Some households added bits of leftover meat, but most kept it vegetable-based. During World War II rationing, when meat was scarce, Bubble and Squeak became a lifeline, stretching food supplies and still providing comfort. Today it survives in pubs and restaurants as a nostalgic side dish, but for working-class families it was once a symbol of survivals. 2 liver and onions few meals defined the working-class British kitchen as clearly as liver and onions. From the mid-19th century through much of the 20th, butcher shops across the country always offered cheap, accessible liver. Packed with iron and vitamins, it was the ideal dish for men in heavy labor and children needing nutrition. The memory of onions sizzling in the pan, filling the house with a strong, unmistakable smell, is etched into countless childhoods. The taste divided families. Some loved it, others dreaded it, but no one could deny its ability to nourish. Typically, it was served with mashed potatoes and gravy, making a meal that was cheap, hearty, and easy to prepare after the Industrial Revolution. When factory towns grew and workers needed fast, affordable food, this dish thrived. In wartime, it became even more essential as a practical source of protein. Today, it's not as common, but for many, liver and onions remains one of the most vivid reminders of their mother's kitchen. Lancashire Hotpot. Lancashire Hotpot is one of northern England's most enduring culinary icons, born in the industrial heartland of Lancashire. Throughout the 19th century, cotton mill workers needed a meal that was inexpensive, warming, and able to feed a family after long shifts. The answer was hot pot, a dish built from the simplest ingredients, yet layered with richness. The method was clever in its simplicity: a base of lamb or mutton, then onions, topped with thinly sliced potatoes. Slowly baked in the oven, the juices from the meat seeped into the potatoes, while the top layer crisped into a golden crust. Every bite offered both comfort and variety. Soft below, crunchy above. Hot pot wasn't just food, it was a community event. Cooked in large pots, it brought families and even neighbors together around the same table. In poorer households, when meat was unaffordable, vegetables alone carried the dish. It symbolized both practicality and warmth, turning scarcity into shared joy. Even today, pubs in the north proudly serve it as a nostalgic classic. 4. Bread and dripping. Perhaps the simplest yet most symbolic working-class dish was bread and dripping. The idea was straightforward. After roasting beef, the leftover fat, known as dripping, was saved, cooled, and spread on bread. Add a sprinkle of salt and pepper, and you had a snack that was cheap, filling, and energy packed in the early 20th century. During the Great Depression and later in the World War II ration years, this snack became essential in the industrial towns of northern England. Meat was a luxury, but its fat was too precious to waste. Children would come home from school to find a slice of bread with dripping waiting for them. And for many, it was the highlight of their day. Though modern health views dismiss it as too fatty, back then it was a survival food. To the families who lived through those days, bread and dripping wasn't unhealthy. It was a memory of resilience, warmth, and the small comforts that kept them going. Even today, older Britons speak of it with surprising fondness. 5. Boiled potatoes with vinegar and butter. When people think of survival foods, potatoes often come to mind, and for good reason. From the late 18th century onward, potatoes became the lifeblood of Britain's working classes. They grew in abundance, cost little, and filled hungry stomachs after long days of labor. While wealthier families might have seen potatoes as a side dish, for the poor they were often the centerpiece of dinner. The variation of boiled potatoes served with butter and malt vinegar may sound simple today, but to a coal miner coming home covered in soot, or a factory worker whose shift lasted 12 hours, it was a godsend. The butter gave a richness that felt indulgent, and the vinegar offered a tangy kick that woke up tired taste buds. Families didn't need fancy sauces or exotic spices. These common pantry items transformed a bowl of boiled potatoes into a meal that felt comforting and complete. During the Industrial Revolution, millions of families migrated to urban centers where life was harsher, colder, and often more cramped. In such conditions, a pot of potatoes could stretch across several meals. Leftovers were reheated or mashed, sometimes turned into soups or pies. It was this adaptability that made potatoes, and especially this simple preparation with vinegar and butter, a fixture of working-class resilience even today. Older generations remember the smell of malt vinegar rising with the steam from a pot of boiled potatoes. It wasn't luxury, it was survival disguised as comfort. 6. Beans on toast, if one dish symbolizes 20th century British working-class identity. It's beans on toast. The dish's genius was its accessibility. Anyone, from a school child to a single parent racing against time, could prepare it in minutes. Open a tin of baked beans, warm them up, pour over toasted bread, and dinner was served. Its popularity soared in post-war Britain when rationing was lifted, but economic hardship lingered. Women were entering the workforce in greater numbers, meaning less time was available for elaborate home cooking. At the same time, the growth of processed foods like canned beans meant a new kind of convenience was within reach. Beans on toast embodied this shift. It was modern, affordable, and democratic. Children loved it because it was hearty but familiar. Parents loved it because it was quick, inexpensive, and provided fiber, protein, and warmth in one plate. In households where both parents worked double shifts, it wasn't unusual for kids to make it themselves after school. In this way, it became more than a dish. It was a rite of passage, a sign of independence for young Britons. Culturally, it even became part of Britain's humor. Jokes about the nation living on beans on toast reflected its ubiquity. It was mocked at times for being too plain, yet the very fact that it endured for decades proved its value. Today it still appears in kitchens and cafes, but with a nostalgic undertone. For those who grew up in the 1960s, 70s, or 80s, the dish carries memories of modest homes, busy lives, and the comfort of knowing that even when money was tight, something hot and filling was always possible. 7. Corned beef hash. Corned beef hash stands as one of the clearest examples of how necessity shaped British food culture. With the arrival of canned corned beef in the early 20th century, a whole new avenue of affordable cooking opened up. Imported originally from Argentina and later produced domestically, tins of corned beef became a staple of wartime Britain. They were cheap, long-lasting, and could be stored in cupboards for months without spoiling. The hash combined this preserved meat with diced potatoes and onions, fried together until golden. The smell alone, meat sizzling with onions, could bring family members to the table before the food was even plated. Some households added extras like fried eggs on top or served it with pickles on the side, but the essence remained the same: a single pan, minimal washing up, maximum satisfaction during World War II and the ration years that followed. Corned beef hash was more than just food. It was a survival tool. For soldiers on the front lines, it offered protein and calories. For families at home, it was a dependable meal in a time of ration books and empty butcher counters. It became the equalizer of the working class. Whether you lived in the industrial north or rural Wales, chances were you had eaten corned beef hash at least once a week. What gave it staying power, even after the war, was its emotional weight. Families associated it with togetherness, with improvising under pressure, with making the most of little. Even now, many older Britons recall how the leftovers were pressed into sandwiches or eaten cold the next morning, reminding them that food was never wasted, and resilience was always part of the recipe. 8. Beef stew with dumplings when Britain's winters were at their harshest, and homes had little more than coal stoves to fight off the cold. Beef stew with dumplings became the season's savior. It was hearty, inexpensive, and deeply satisfying, an edible shield against frost. The stew itself was built from tough, cheap cuts of beef, such as shin or chuck, slow-cooked until tender. Into the pot went root vegetables: carrots, turnips, parsnips, onions. As the hours passed, the flavors deepened, the broth thickened, and the house filled with a comforting aroma. But the crowning glory was the dumplings. Made from flour, suet, and a pinch of salt, they were rolled into balls and dropped directly into the bubbling pot. They puffed up as they simmered, soaking in the rich juices, turning into fluffy, savory treasures. For working families, this stew was more than dinner. It was strategy. A single pot could last for days, with each reheating making the flavors richer. It offered not just nourishment, but also efficiency. Fewer ingredients, less fuel used, and a hot meal guaranteed. In times before central heating, a bowl of stew might genuinely have been the warmest part of the day. Socially, too, it played a role. Families gathered around the pot, sharing from one source. In neighborhoods where poverty was widespread, even neighbors might share portions, ensuring that no one went hungry. In this way, the dish was not only sustenance, but also community building. A quiet reminder that survival was often a collective effort today. Beef stew with dumplings survives in pubs and home kitchens, often romanticized as traditional British comfort food. But its true legacy lies in the fact that it carried entire generations through winters of hardship. It was less about indulgence and more about endurance, proving that simple ingredients could still create meals that warmed both body and soul. 9. Toad in the hole. Toad in the hole is one of those dishes that carries both humor and heart. Its name alone sparks curiosity, yet its place in the working-class kitchen was entirely practical. Dating back to the late 18th century, it was a way for families to make a few sausages stretch into a meal that felt plentiful. The sausages were nestled in a Yorkshire pudding batter and baked in the oven, creating golden, crispy edges with a soft, fluffy center as it cooked. The smell filled the home, and children would rush to the table before it was even ready. For many working families, sausages were one of the most affordable meats available, and combining them with a cheap batter created a dish that felt hearty and indulgent without being costly. Especially from the 1920s through the 1950s, toad in the hole was a staple of weekly menus in industrial towns and small homes alike. Today, it survives in restaurants as a nostalgic comfort dish. But for the working class, it symbolized the joy of turning modest ingredients into something festive and filling. 10. Faggots and gravy. Faggots and gravy may sound unusual to modern ears, but in the Midlands and South Wales, it was one of the most traditional working-class dishes. These small meatballs were made from inexpensive cuts, such as pork liver and fatty scraps, mixed with herbs and breadcrumbs, then baked or braised. Served with thick brown gravy and mashed potatoes, they provided both flavor and sustenance. This dish thrived in the 19th century when miners and factory workers needed hearty meals after grueling shifts. Butchers would often sell offal cheaply, and resourceful families turned it into something nourishing and surprisingly delicious. The herbs and spices not only stretched the flavor, but also masked the stronger smell of offal, making it more appealing, though the name may raise eyebrows today. Within its historical context, this dish was a symbol of thrift and creativity. For the communities who relied on it, faggots and gravy wasn't just food. It was proof that dignity and comfort could be found even in the simplest, cheapest ingredients. 11. Peas pudding. Peas pudding, sometimes called peas porridge, was one of the oldest staples of Britain's working-class diet. Made from yellow split peas boiled into a thick puree, it was filling, inexpensive, and able to last for days. This dish dates back as far as the Middle Ages and remained a household favorite well into the 19th century. Dried peas were cheap, stored easily, and could be cooked in large pots to feed entire families. In the growing industrial towns, workers often ate a bowl of peas pudding before long shifts, finding in it the fuel to get through physically demanding days. Its cultural presence is preserved in the nursery rhyme. Peas porridge hot, peas porridge cold, peas porridge in the pot. 9 days old. That rhyme reflects reality. Peas pudding was reheated again and again, stretched as long as possible, and consumed until every last spoonful was gone. Today, it may seem outdated, but historically it was a vital reminder that survival was often built on the most modest of foods. 12. Bread pudding. If there was one dessert that truly belonged to the working-class kitchen, it was bread pudding. Born from necessity, it transformed stale bread destined for the bin into something sweet and satisfying. Mixed with milk, eggs, sugar, and dried fruit, it was baked into a pudding that was crisp on top and soft within. In the 19th century, and throughout wartime Britain, nothing could be wasted. Bread pudding was the answer to that ethic of thrift. For children, it was often the only sweet treat they could look forward to. And for adults, it was a clever way to make scarce ingredients go further. What made it special was not just the taste, but the symbolism. In households where even dessert had to be invented out of scraps, bread pudding represented joy amid hardship. Families found a way to turn poverty into sweetness, to ensure that even in the toughest times, life had its moments of comfort. Today, it survives in bakeries and kitchens as a nostalgic classic, but its roots are tied to resilience and creativity in the face of scarcity. These 12 dishes were never simply about food. They were about survival, memory, and the collective spirit of Britain's working class. In factories, in coal mines during wartime, and in years of economic struggle, these plates carried families through. They were crafted by mothers stretching every penny, by fathers coming home hungry from exhausting shifts, by children who grew up tasting both hardship and love in the same spoonful. Looking back now, we might see them as simple or even quaint. But in truth, each dish tells the story of a nation that endured, adapted, and found warmth in the kitchen even when the world outside was cold. They remind us that food is not only about flavor, it is about resilience, resourcefulness, and the bonds of family and community. This is why working-class dishes are not just recipes. They are living symbols of how Britain survived its hardest days. They fed not only the body, but also the spirit, proving that even in scarcity, there was still room for comfort, tradition, and hope.